If the Russian Topol missile strikes London, nothing will survive. Everything ends. Imagine the impact of an 800 kiloton explosion over the British capital. The Topol missile, known for its brutal destructive capability, pulverizes everything in its radius, reducing the city's most iconic landmarks to ashes. According to simulations conducted by experts such as Professor Alex Wellerstein, the damage would not only be physical, but an act of total annihilation. Westminster would disappear instantly. The searing heat would evaporate anyone in seconds, and nearby cities would not be safe from radioactive fallout. The devastating Russian Topol missile sends Britons into panic. Can you imagine 800 kilotons of power? A single warhead from this missile could change London's fate, plunging the British capital into absolute chaos. The Topol, a long-range ballistic missile with terrifying destructive capacity, is part of Russia's nuclear arsenal. Its impact on the city would represent not just a physical catastrophe, but an act that would redefine human history. This article explores, without embellishment or fiction, the possible effects of such an attack, how events would unfold immediately, and what would happen in terms of survival and devastation. To understand the magnitude of the damage a Topol missile could inflict on London, we must first comprehend its nature. The Topol, officially named the RT-2PM Topol, NATO reporting name SS-25 Sickle, is an intercontinental ballistic missile with an 800 kiloton warhead. This means its destructive power is literally tens of thousands of times greater than the bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Topol's nuclear payload is not just an explosion. It is a force capable of vaporizing everything within its direct impact radius, including millions of lives. If the missile were to strike central London, as speculated in Professor Wellerstein's analysis on nuclearsecrecy.com, the results would be apocalyptic. The simulation indicates that with an 800 kiloton direct explosion, London would turn into a ghostly wasteland. Westminster, one of the city's most iconic districts, would be reduced to a sea of ashes. The heat generated by the explosion would be so intense that everything within the fireball would be practically vaporized. People at the epicenter of the attack would die instantly, turned into wandering shadows by the incandescent blaze. Even several kilometers away, the effects would be devastating. The residents of areas like Fulham, Brixton, Clapham, and Kingston, though not at ground zero, would suffer severe burns, many of which could be third degree, with minimal chances of survival. What is even more terrifying, according to Wellerstein, is that once the explosion dissipates, radioactive fallout would cover vast areas, rendering the zone uninhabitable for years, if not generations. Beyond the initial wave of destruction, the real question is, who would have any chance of survival in a scenario where the British capital is obliterated? People in cities farther from the direct explosion, such as Cardiff, Edinburgh, or Liverpool, would have a higher probability of surviving, but not without consequences. Radiation and radioactive debris could make life in these cities nearly impossible, severely affecting water supplies, food, and medical resources. Not to mention the total collapse of transportation, communication, and healthcare infrastructure. The uncertainty of surviving radioactive exposure is another factor to consider. People at a considerable distance from the explosion could still be exposed to lethal radiation levels in the days and weeks following the attack, leading to severe illnesses, genetic mutations, and a slow, agonizing death. This kind of disaster would extend far beyond the first minutes or days, as the consequences of a nuclear explosion are something that lingers for generations. Of course, all this devastation would come at a political and economic cost. London's economy, the financial heart of the United Kingdom, would be crushed. The consequences for regional and global economies would be equally catastrophic. In response, the international community would be caught between a struggle for survival and the urgent need to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. This scenario highlights that the nuclear threat has always been a sword of Damocles hanging over the world, and a single move, such as Russia launching its Topol missile, could mark the end of an era. It is worth mentioning that although many in the West tend to dismiss the possibility of such a nuclear attack, the reality is that geopolitical tensions between Russia and the United Kingdom remain high. recent history has been marked by renewed confrontation between major nuclear powers. While the British government and its NATO allies accuse Russia of being a global threat, the Kremlin views the West as a constant provocateur, especially when it comes to the borders of its sphere of influence. In this context, sanctions, indirect confrontations through conflicts in third-party countries, and, above all, mutual threats have turned Europe into a zone of high vulnerability. Professor Wellerstein has modeled these catastrophic scenarios not only to examine the immediate effects of a nuclear attack, but also its long-term implications. It is important to highlight that in such scenarios, destruction is not limited to the initial explosion and immediate deaths, but extends to the radioactive fallout. This includes the creation of a nuclear winter, the collapse of agriculture, and global climate change, consequences that would affect countries far beyond the reach of the bombs themselves. Although peace advocates and diplomats insist that a nuclear attack is unlikely, current circumstances suggest otherwise. If Russia's entire nuclear arsenal were deployed, the consequences would be universal. Researcher Igor Nikolin, a former member of the UN Commission on Biological and Chemical Weapons, warned of the global impact of widespread nuclear weapon use, stating that there will be no clean zones left. Despite this, scientists from a University of Otago suggest that some locations, such as New Zealand and Australia, might be less affected by a nuclear winter. However, in a large-scale nuclear conflict, no corner of the planet would escape its collateral effects. Meanwhile, as Wellerstein's simulation shows, the impact of a Topol missile strike could be the catalyst for a series of events that would irreversibly change the course of history. In such a case, the British people would not only have to face the destruction of their capital, but also a massive loss of human lives, the disappearance of their infrastructure, and the prolonged suffering of the survivors. The potential detonation of a Russian Topol missile over London is a chilling scenario that highlights the catastrophic consequences of nuclear warfare. Beyond the immediate destruction, the long-term effects, radioactive fallout, economic collapse, and environmental devastation would reshape the world as we know it. History has shown that nuclear weapons possess an unparalleled power to inflict mass suffering, and any escalation in geopolitical tensions could lead to an irreversible disaster. The world remains at the mercy of political decisions, and the fragility of peace is a stark reminder of the high stakes involved in nuclear deterrence. While some may dismiss such an attack as improbable, global conflicts and military posturing continue to increase the risks. Now more than ever, diplomacy and international cooperation are vital to preventing an event that could alter human civilization forever. The threat of nuclear war is real, and understanding its consequences is crucial. If you want to learn more about global security, nuclear warfare, and the measures needed to prevent such catastrophes, subscribe to our channel and stay informed. Share this video to spread awareness, because knowledge is the first step to ensuring a safer future for all.